Hi, I'm Jen. I thought my baby shower would be a celebration, not a humiliation. My father-in-law stood up, glass in hand, and mocked my parents for being too poor to belong in this family. Everyone laughed, except me, because what he didn't know was that the LED screen behind him was about to show the real owner of his company. And when it did, everything changed. I had spent weeks planning every detail of that baby shower. It wasn't for me, I was past that stage. But I wanted it to be perfect for my sister-in-law. Balloons and soft pastels floated above the buffet I'd prepared by hand. I'd made finger sandwiches, deviled eggs, homemade lemonade. I even rented white folding chairs with pink bows tied on the backs. No one offered to help, especially not Mason. He was glued to his phone, thumbs tapping non-stop, even as guests began to arrive. I watched from the patio door as people filtered into our backyard. Friends from church, some neighbors, a few women from Mason's side of the family. I smiled, nodded, ushered them in. But there was that heaviness in my chest. Something wasn't right. Maybe it was the silence and how people passed me without much notice. Or maybe it was the smirk on Earl's face when he walked through the gate, arms wide, like he owned the place. "Pinterest threw up back here, huh?" he barked, loud enough for half the yard to hear. I laughed lightly, as if it didn't sting, but it did. "Women today," he muttered, "spend more on decorations than they do on diapers." People chuckled, those nervous, tight laughs that said they didn't agree, but wouldn't say a word. Earl helped himself to a beer from the cooler, without asking. Then he plopped into one of the chairs, like it was his throne. "Jen, you working these days?" he asked, too loudly, with a pointed grin. "I'm consulting from home. Part-time," I said. "Consulting," he echoed with a scoff. "Ah, yes. That modern term for doing nothing and calling it something." The laughs came again. They always did when he spoke, and each one chipped at my pride a little more. I remembered the first time I met Earl, how he asked Mason, not me, where I went to college. How he'd said over dinner, "She's pretty, but pretty doesn't last." I stayed quiet then. I stayed quiet now, he went on, holding court like always. "Back in my day, women didn't throw themselves showers. They just had the baby and got back to work. Or back to cooking, depending on the marriage." I walked around, refilling cups, pretending not to hear. But I heard it all. "Your folks not coming, Jen?" he asked, loud enough for the others to pause. I forced a smile. "They had a conflict. My dad's on shift. Figures," he said. "Probably pulling doubles. Gotta keep up with all this fancy stuff, huh?" I felt Amanda's hand under the table, squeezing mine gently. Her eyes said, "I see this. I'm here." I nodded. I wasn't alone, but it still felt like I was. Earl leaned back, arms spread, grinning at the crowd. "Let's just hope this kid takes after the other side of the family. Lord knows we don't need more GEDs in the mix." The air fell still. Someone coughed. Someone else cleared a plate. I excused myself to the kitchen. The dishes didn't need washing, but I needed to breathe. The soap on my hands was warm. Familiar. Safe. I stared at the bubbles and remembered what my mum used to say. "You don't have to raise your voice to raise your value." I whispered it like a prayer. I could have gone back out and snapped, told Earl off, kicked him out of my house. But what would that have done? No. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Ellie ran in, tugging my shirt. "Mummy, Grandpa's being weird again." I knelt down. "He's just talking too much. You having fun?" She nodded. "Can I have more punch?" "Of course," I said, kissing her forehead. "You're the star today." Back outside, the air had shifted. The sun dipped lower, painting gold across the yard. Mason finally stood up, clinking a glass. "All right, y'all time for a surprise?" He pointed at the LED screen we'd set up on the far end of the lawn. I didn't even remember him touching it all afternoon. He clicked a remote. The screen flickered once, then settled on a blank white page. "Another slideshow," Earl groaned. "Or are we all gonna watch her LinkedIn profile?" A few people chuckled, but I didn't, because I saw something different. The screen blinked again, and for a split second, something strange flashed across it. A corporate logo, a PDF icon, a headline, Change of ownership. Immediate effect. Earl didn't notice. He was still laughing. But I knew. I stepped forward. Just a little. Enough to catch the breeze. My voice, just in my head, said what my lips didn't. He had no idea what was coming. The moment the LED screen flashed, the backyard went silent. The laughter caught in Earl's throat, his mouth still open mid-joke. As the words came into focus, transfer of majority shares. Jennifer L. Harper. 51% ownership. A ripple ran through the crowd. Whispers. Confused glances. The kind of polite clapping that didn't know where to land. Someone asked if it was part of the baby shower entertainment. Earl chuckled dryly. Well, that's rich. Nice one, Mason. But Mason wasn't laughing. He stood still, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the screen. And I just stood there. I wasn't smug. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't anything he expected. This isn't revenge, I thought. This is reclamation. Sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to raise the stakes. Sometimes, you just need the right paperwork. At the right time. The screen flickered off. The guests started to disperse, murmuring thanks, tossing awkward glances our way. My heart wasn't. Racing, it was steady, focused. But I knew what was coming. Inside the house, the second the door shut behind us, Mason let loose. What the hell was that? I didn't flinch. You blindsided him on purpose. You embarrassed my father in front of our family. No, I said, calmly. I followed through on what I told you weeks ago. You didn't listen. I thought it was just venting, Jen. You said stuff like that all the time. How tired you were. How fed up with him you'd become. But this? He paced across the kitchen like a man cornered. You really did it. I didn't reply right away. I wanted him to hear the silence. Let it fill the room. Let it show him all the things I'd swallowed over the years. You never asked what I was doing with my nights after Ellie went to bed, I said. You never cared why I took those consulting calls, or why I still kept my professional license active. You thought I was just decorating and baking. I didn't think you'd go behind our backs. Our? I interrupted. Whose side are you on, Mason? That question didn't land gently. It hit like cold water. And he didn't answer. I didn't go behind anyone's back. I continued. I went through the front door. I followed the rules. You just weren't watching. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples like it was all just noise. I wasn't done. You told me I needed to stop chasing childish ambitions after Ellie was born. You said I should focus on the home. So I did. I focused on building one without you noticing it wasn't yours anymore. He looked up at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker not of fear but of recognition. Like he finally realized I wasn't bluffing. I never had been. I bought the shares through a trust, I said. Over 6 months. Quietly. Earl never noticed the change in board voting rights, because he stopped reading anything that didn't flatter him. He shook his head. This is going to tear the family apart. No, I replied. This reveals that it was already torn. You just liked the silence. A knock on the door pulled us out of that moment. Earl. He stepped inside without waiting for an invite. A few guests lingered by the driveway, pretending not to watch. Well played, he muttered, forcing a grin. Real cute move. Must have taken all your baking skills to pull it off. I said nothing. He leaned in, just close enough so only I could hear. This isn't over. Let's see how long you last in my world. He straightened up and turned to Mason. Board meeting. Tomorrow morning. Emergency session. Then back to me, smirking again. Hope you like cold rooms full of old men. I didn't flinch. I came prepared, Earl, I said flatly. And the board? Already briefed. Hours ago. He blinked. Just once. Then left without another word. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in years, I felt taller. Later that night, after the house was finally quiet, I stood alone in the kitchen. The leftover cupcakes sat untouched. My hands were wrapped around a warm mug. Not because I needed it, but because sometimes you just want to hold something steady. My phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in weeks. Lorraine. The message was short. What you did today was brave. If you ever want to know what really happened to your shares, call me. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. My breath caught, not in panic, but impossibility. All these years, I thought I was alone in the room. Turns out, someone else was just afraid to speak. I stared at Lorraine's text again. If you ever want to know what really happened to your shares, and felt my pulse thrum in the quiet of the early morning. It was a soft invitation wrapped in danger. I recalled her cool courtesy at family gatherings, how she'd always stand at the sidelines, neither propping me up, nor pushing me down. She was neutral. Until now. Silence isn't cowardice. Sometimes it's survival. I typed a brief reply. Let's meet. Then I closed the app and sat there, letting the weight of what might come settle in. Something told me this was more than a peace offering. Later that day, I drove to the diner. She'd always gone to a little place with vinyl booths and checkered floors. Lorraine arrived first, clutching a weathered envelope. Her expression was taut, like a wire pulled too tight. She waved me in. She sat across from me, voice low. I signed that trust document, but it wasn't fair. Earl changed terms behind my back. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was yellowed paper, loan agreements with her signature loans she co-signed when the company was small. Earl promised me I'd be taken care of. He didn't mention what I signed would become his tool. Her hands trembled. He forged a partial transfer, she said, barely above a whisper. Years ago, in that so-called family restructuring, your name was edited out. I saw it. I knew, but I stayed quiet, afraid of losing my grandchildren, my place. I listened, nodding, letting each confession land. Betrayal wasn't new to me, but hearing it from someone inside changed something. He's already building legal walls around you, Lorraine said. I'm telling you this because I'm scared not for me, but for your unborn child. You need to be 10 steps ahead. I swallowed. The guilt, the fear, the possibility, they tangled inside me like a storm. But resolve settled in. If she could break her silence, maybe I could too. Back at home, I sat in my office, poring over old emails, bank statements, board minutes. I traced my name disappearing from internal memos. I saw entries moved, footnotes erased. They'd done this gradually, so no single move would scream fraud. They don't steal everything at once, I thought. They make you feel you're imagining it. I remembered Earl once handing me an anniversary bonus, a check with vague conditions. It was never about love. It was about control. I called an old law school friend in Chicago, a corporate attorney, who owed me favors. She listened, asked sharp questions, then said, "You need Lorraine's affidavit. That's your leverage to freeze board action until you can prove your claim." I hesitated. To drag family into court is to break bonds. But those bonds were already broken. I realized I wasn't just reclaiming my name. I was redrawing a map they had long ago scribbled me out of. That night, my phone rang. I answered. It was Lorraine. According to her voice, she would sign the affidavit if I would consent to one condition. I held my breath. She said, "I want full visitation rights with your child, if anything happens to you." Her demand hung between us. Ally? Or disguised predator? I thought, was this an ally stepping out of the shadows? Or just another shadow in disguise? The sun had just dipped low behind the trees. When I pulled up to the Laird estate, from the driveway, the house looked like it always had pristine, symmetrical, proud. But inside, I knew, the walls held things that didn't show up in photos. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the door, like I'd done 100 times before. Except this time, I wasn't the same woman they used to quietly overlook. The so-called family hour was already underway. I stepped inside and was greeted with a mix of half smiles and murmurs. The living room was full, but no one seemed truly present. Small talk buzzed, brittle, and cautious. A few cousins stood clumped by the fireplace. Others loitered by the open patio doors, eyes darting from person to person, unsure where to land. Then came Earl, my father-in-law, buttoned up as always, his smile rehearsed. He walked over, glass of something amber in hand, and offered a nod that stopped short of warmth. "Jen?" he said, voice smooth but tight, still glowing from the party. "I see." I smiled faintly, knowing better than to take the bait. Trying to. He chuckled softly, then leaned in just a little too close. You've got a knack for style. Always did. Just wish some of that carried over to more substantial matters. There it was. I remembered dinners at this house, where compliments came wrapped in sharp edges. That dress looks lovely, they'd say. Almost makes up for your late arrival. Or, you're good with the kids, surprising, really. As I crossed the room, I passed the familiar gallery wall of framed family photos. Year after year, birthday after birthday, they lined up like a timeline of someone else's life. My husband in his childhood Halloween costume, Griffin holding his diploma, Verity with her firstborn. But no photo of me. Not even from our wedding. I set my drink on the side table. I wasn't thirsty anymore. My place in this family had always been written in pencil, easy to erase. Earl raised his glass, drawing attention like he always did, when he wanted to assert control without seeming forceful. You know, he began, voice rising just enough to gather the room. Decorating a baby shower doesn't necessarily show competence in business. The air didn't quite freeze, but it cooled. I heard soft chuckles, that awful kind people make when they know they're not the target. A few heads nodded. A few others avoided my gaze. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and said, calmly, this house gets decorated, but values get buried. It was quiet. For a second too long. Then Earl laughed. Not because it was funny he laughed, because that's what men like him do when they feel a pinch. Let's see if you can decorate a balance sheet, he smirked. I looked at him, without blinking. My heart was racing, but not from fear. I'd heard this man diminish me for years. Back when I was working at my old firm, he'd call me overeager, soft, charming, but not quite ready for the big leagues. He'd never said I was wrong, just not enough. That was his move. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The silence said more. My hands were steady, but my spine felt tight, like it knew something big was coming. Earl waved toward the large LED display, hanging just above the fireplace. Let's take a stroll down memory lane, he said with a mock warmth that barely hid the smugness underneath. The screen came to life, first showing a sleek animation of the company's growth over the decades. Then it transitioned to a slideshow titled Our Legacy. Old family photos faded in and out. Children in matching Christmas pajamas. Backyard barbecues. Graduation caps. Weddings. But I wasn't in a single frame. Not even the one from Griffin's wedding. Our wedding. Then came the grandkids. All of them. Except Lily. It wasn't a mistake. It was precise. Intentional. My fingers curled around the glass in my hand. Knuckles white. I didn't speak. I knew better than to interrupt just yet. Tessa leaned toward me and whispered, just loud enough for others to hear. We don't have old photos of you, because you weren't part of our story. No one gasped. No one defended me. They didn't need to. The exclusion spoke louder than any outburst ever could. I stared at the screen, where a shot of Earl holding Griffin as a baby lingered for just a second too long. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was a ghost. A tolerated presence, with no past, no roots, no acknowledgement. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. Not here. Not in front of them. I rose. Slowly. My hands were steady, but my voice had to fight its way through the knot in my throat. I think it's time we talk about what inclusion really means, I said, scanning the room. Because, if I'm only visible when it's convenient for your narrative, then I'm not really here at all. Earl chuckled. Not kindly. Now, let's not ruin a perfectly decent evening. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just pointing out what's already broken. He tilted his head. Oh, come on, Jen. You've always been sensitive. I ignored that. I reached into my bag and took out a manila folder. Here's a list of shareholder briefings I was excluded from. Internal memos. Decision-making loops where I was deliberately left out. You want to talk about competence? Try doing business with blinders on. Gasps. Small ones. But they landed. Earl's expression tightened. You sound ungrateful. Ungrateful? I said, holding his gaze. I gave more to this family than you ever acknowledged. I was your son's wife, the mother of your grandchild, a co-owner of this business, before you decided I was easier to ignore. Mason stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides, but I raised a hand. Not now. This was mine. Verity stood up, too. Dad, enough. You don't get to rewrite the story just because you don't like who's in it. Silence fell again. Thick and uncomfortable. I let it sit. The kind of silence that says, "We all heard that, and no one can unhear it." Earl, still clutching his glass, tried to laugh, but the sound came out sharp, dry. He looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on him now. "You always were emotional," he muttered, voice rising slightly. "That's not business, Jen. That's drama." Tessa, ever the performer, took that as her cue. She picked up the mic from the corner console and raised her glass high. "Let's toast to the man who built it all," she said sweetly, eyes darting to Earl. "To his leadership, his legacy." But then the mic, still on, caught Earl's low snarl, barely above a whisper, but clear as day through the speakers. "Wait till they see the real documents I hidden." The air snapped. I stood frozen for half a second, long enough to feel the rush of understanding settle deep into my chest. I heard it. Others heard it. They just didn't know what it meant. Yet. But I did. My gaze locked on his face, and I saw it the slip. He knew. He thought he was in control, but now, he'd shown his hand, and the game was changing. In my head, calm as ever, I said to myself, he just confirmed it, and none of them know what's coming. I showed up early, not because I had to, but because I needed that room to breathe me in first. The Laird boardroom had always belonged to Earl. His scent was in the wood, his rules stitched into the upholstery. But tonight, I carried my own gravity. The documents were in my tote. Lorraine's affidavit, the one she passed to me, like a lifeline in a storm. And the kept back, a silver hair clip from her drawer, now clipped to the corner of my file. Not just an accessory. A message. Finish what she started. I sat alone, flipping through the papers, highlighting what mattered most. Quiet. Focused. My heart pacing, but my fingers still. My phone buzzed. All board members had confirmed attendance. Every chair would be filled. Tessa's heels clicked in the hallway. She leaned into the doorframe, arms crossed. "You sure you want to do this tonight?" I didn't look up. Just said, "I have no choice." She didn't answer, just walked away. Minutes later, the room filled. Colt arrived first, nodded. Nadine followed. Then Griffin, his face unreadable. Earl entered last. Like a man walking into a party he thought he owned. Lights dimmed. The LED screen flickered to life behind him. He tapped the table gently, like a judge about to sentence someone. "Let's keep it short," he began, smooth as ever. "Family business is best kept simple." I stood before he could slide into another monologue. I projected Lorraine's affidavit on the screen, then a series of contracts buried under old board filings. "This is not about sentiment," I said. "It's about facts." Earl laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You really think you can rewrite history with a few dusty papers?" "I'm not rewriting anything," I said. "I'm revealing it." He waved toward the screen. "Those signatures, fabrications." She wasn't in her right mind. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. She was more lucid than you ever gave her credit for, and she documented everything, including your refusal to file my rightful share certificates. Gasps rippled. Colt shifted. Nadine's brows furrowed. "They don't know how low I can go to rise," I thought, and steadied myself. "You wanted drama," Earl snapped. "This is business, and I'm reclaiming mine," I replied. I laid out board clause protections, corporate precedent, and line by line of omissions where my rights were bypassed. Griffin stared at the table. Across from me, Nadine folded a slip of paper and passed it to Colt. Then I brought out the sealed envelope. I broke the wax in front of them all. Inside, the original share transfer, signed by Earl, co-signed by Lorraine. It granted me controlling interest if Earl defaulted or withheld rightful documents for more than 90 days. He had withheld them for 14 months. Silence. I read the clause out loud, slowly, every word like a brick, crashing through stained glass. Earl's face shifted. Not anger, fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mason sat back, stunned. Tessa turned pale. Truth doesn't scream. It lands like a blade in soft flesh. I let it sit. The silence. The weight of it. I didn't need to yell. I just needed them to hear. Earl slammed the table. Order! But his voice cracked. The tremble undercut the command. I hereby end this session, he declared. But Colt raised a hand, calm but firm. We'll need a formal vote. Tessa leaned toward Nadine. Mum's name is on that document too. Earl looked around, desperate for support. Then, low and seething, he muttered just loud enough. Madwoman. I stood straighter. You cannot ignore me any longer, Earl. No one moved. No one breathed. The room fell silent, and I realized this was no board fight. This was my reckoning. The morning after the board meeting felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. It means distance. The other side of the bed was cold. Ethan hadn't come home. I sat up slowly, still in yesterday's clothes, the memory of the night clinging to me like smoke. The house felt hollow, even the air, uncertain about what to do next. On the kitchen counter, my phone blinked. A text from Tessa. He's furious. Be careful. I didn't reply. Instead, I filled the kettle, watched the steam rise, and tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. That's when I saw it. An envelope, slid halfway under the door, cream-colored, unmarked. I tore it open, and the words hit like a slap. Cease and desist. Earl's private counsel. He was accusing me of defamation. I laughed quietly to myself, though nothing was funny. Truth has a cost, I thought, staring at the letter. I just didn't know it would be billed this early. Next to the coffee pot, a note in Ethan's handwriting. Needed space. You're turning this into a war. The words cut deeper than any legal document. I folded the paper, tucked it under the envelope, and stood there, letting the silence soak through the walls. The war, it seemed, was already here. By noon, I was in my lawyer's office downtown, sitting in a chair too soft for the kind of conversation we were about to have. He looked at me over his glasses, a cautious sympathy in his tone. Earl's moving fast, he said. He's filed a motion to freeze. Part of the family. Trust claims you're mentally unfit to manage. Your stake. I blinked. Excuse me? He's arguing emotional instability due to pregnancy, the lawyer continued. He's using your own medical records as leverage. I felt my hands curl into fists. He's using my baby as ammunition. Unfortunately, that's exactly what he's doing, he replied quietly. We could hold a press briefing, get ahead of it, shape the narrative. I shook my head. No, this isn't a tabloid war. Not yet. Instead, I told him to order a forensic audit of every family trust allocation for the last 5 years. He's hiding something, I said. I want it found. When I stepped out of that office, the city looked sharper, the skyline, colder. I stood there a long time, hands in my coat pockets, trying to remind myself that fear is temporary, but evidence lasts. That afternoon, an email arrived from Lorraine. Subject line, brunch just the girls. Her messages always carried a kind of polite threat. I stared at the screen for a while, before replying with one word. Okay. By Sunday, I walked into the country club dining room. Lorraine was already seated, her posture perfect, pearls gleaming. Beside her, Nadine and Colt uninvited, but clearly expected. A trap dressed as civility. Jen, Lorraine greeted, her tone too smooth. I thought we could talk. I sat down slowly. About what? She slid an envelope across the table. A settlement proposal. It's generous. You sign this, and the family ensures a comfortable payout after maternity leave. No more fighting. I stared at the papers. Legal phrasing. Numbers that looked large but small compared to what was mine. Nadine smiled gently. Too gently. We just want peace, Jen. You can't keep doing this while carrying a child. I folded the document neatly and placed it back in front of Lorraine. Funny, I said. How your version of peace only works when I'm silent. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft clink of my glass as I finished my juice. Then I stood, pushed the chair back, and walked out without another word. The afternoon sunlight hit me as I stepped outside. It burned through the chill, and I realized something I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard anymore. Silence, used right, could be louder than any scream. When I got home that evening, the answering machine light was blinking red. I pressed play. Mrs. Laird, a voice said, crisp and rehearsed. This is Channel 8 News, requesting comment on the alleged breakdown between you and the Laird family. We understand there were heated exchanges at the recent board meeting. The message continued, but I stopped listening halfway through. My stomach turned. Not from fear, but from confirmation. The leaks had begun. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank document for a long moment. Then I started typing. To my unborn child. If they want the world to hear their version, then the world will hear mine too. The noise didn't fade. It just shifted. Earl gathered everyone back into the banquet hall, like nothing had happened, like the board meeting hadn't cracked something wide open. He smiled too wide, his voice forced warm, calling it a night of family legacy and renewal. Guests trickled in, murmuring behind clutched glasses. No one looked straight at me, but I felt the glances. The silence around me wasn't discomfort, it was recognition. He raised his champagne flute, hand trembling just enough to betray him. Tonight, he said, we honor the past and welcome the future. My eyes stayed on him. No reaction, just breathing steady. The LED screen flickered to life behind him. He turned toward it with that rehearsed confidence, motioning toward the display like a game show host, about to reveal a prize. Let's take a look at our family legacy, our story, in names and numbers. He thought he could bury me in a spotlight. He forgot I helped build that light. The screen changed. White background, gold header, family legacy and ownership directory. Then, it appeared, right under the Laird family seal, in bold text and a legal watermark. Majority owner, Verity Holcomb timestamp, legal reference, notarized affidavit number. The room froze. A breath caught halfway through a toast. The next slide didn't wait for Earl to regain his footing. It moved to board signatures, Lorraine's name prominent, the seal of the legal trust. Chatter stopped. Chairs creaked as people leaned in. Tessa's hand covered her mouth. Nadine went pale. Colt looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. Earl cleared his throat. That's not the final version. Must be a misload from the presentation team. Ignore that slide. Too late. I caught the flicker of movement. Tessa sliding her phone from her clutch. Snap. Send. The photo of that slide was now free. Released. I didn't need to speak. My silence was a shield. That slide they handed me the sword. As the lights dimmed back, whispers moved like a tide. Someone muttered, "She earned this." Another voice. Low. "He's losing control." I just stood there, still and steady. Earl tried to keep pace, but his rhythm was gone. He gestured to move the presentation along, skipping slides. Didn't matter. The shift had happened. After the gathering thinned, Earl retreated to the board table with a stiff drink in hand. I walked to him slowly, not for drama, for truth. "You tried to bury me," I said, quiet enough for only him to hear. "Instead, you buried your lies." He looked at me, with something between disbelief and rage. "This isn't how family settles things." "No," I said. "This is how liars get exposed." He mumbled about procedural errors, mistrust. "You blindsided this family." I placed the affidavit on the table next to him. Lorraine's signature clear. The share registry, stamped. All legal, all complete. Griffin stood. His eyes darted from Earl to me, torn between loyalty and truth. Behind him, murmurs swelled again. Board members weren't just observing now, they were recalculating. For the first time, Earl didn't look untouchable. He looked cornered. I knew then. The power had shifted. But the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. That night, well past midnight, after most guests had gone, and I had locked every window and door, I heard the vibration of a text message on the kitchen counter. "Blocked number. Check your car. Someone left you a parting gift." My breath caught. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the cool dark outside. Under the porch light, I saw it. All 4 tires slashed. Windshield smashed through. On the driver's seat, a sticky note. Black ink. Sharp handwriting. "You can't rewrite blood without consequence." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood there, the gravel cool under my bare feet, the metal glinting like it was daring me to react. And I whispered, just to myself, "He thinks he's winning. He just opened the racetrack. The morning light spilled through the curtains, but all I could see was the image of my car window shattered, tires slashed, a crude message scrawled across the hood. It wasn't about glass or metal. It was about control. Griffin stood in the kitchen, pacing. "He's gone too far," he said quietly. "Let me talk to him." I poured coffee, ignoring the tremor in my hands. "This isn't about talking," I said. "It's about taking back what's mine." He sighed. "Jen, this fight, it's tearing everything apart." I turned to him, steady. "No. It's revealing what was already broken." Just then, Verity called. Her voice was sharp, efficient. "Media's asking for a statement about last night," she said. "Let the record speak," I told her. A long pause. "Then we'll see them. At headquarters." On the drive into the city, I stared out the window, watching the skyline rise like a verdict. Fear used to silence me. Now, it honed me. Every mile closer to the boardroom felt like another layer of weakness burned away. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. King's words ran through my head. They fit better now than ever. When we arrived, the atmosphere was already electric. Cameras lingered outside the building. Inside, the air felt heavy anticipation, resentment, and something else, reckoning. The boardroom was full. Earl sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, pretending he still held authority. He greeted people with forced warmth, shaking hands he no longer owned. I walked in with Verity beside me, holding a folder close to my chest. Earl looked up, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You're late," he said. "No," I replied. "You're early for your removal." I laid the folder on the table and slid it toward the center. The legal notice unfolded in silence, an injunction against his executive powers, signed and sealed by the court that morning. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Verity's voice cut through the still air, calm and precise. "The company deserves transparency, not tyranny," Earl scoffed. "This is absurd. You're staging a coup." I leaned forward, my tone even. "No, I'm restoring order." From the folder, I pulled printed records, emails, transfers, offshore accounts, proof of tax evasion and asset concealment. I didn't embellish. I didn't have to. Facts speak louder when the guilty are the only ones left talking. Earl's jaw tightened. Griffin shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interrupt. The board members leaned closer, eyes darting from me to the papers, then to one another. "I built this company," Earl snapped. Verity replied softly, "And you nearly sold it to cover your lies." Silence again. A long, final kind of silence. When the motion for an emergency leadership vote was called, no one objected. I stepped back with Verity, waiting in the hallway while the doors closed behind us. The faint hum of conversation inside was muffled but tense. After what felt like an hour, the door opened. Colt stepped out first, his expression unreadable. "It's done," he said. Earl had been suspended, pending investigation. Verity was named acting chairwoman. My name was added to the strategic committee. Inside, I could still hear the sound of Earl's briefcase slamming shut. He brushed past us in the hall, muttering under his breath, "This isn't over." He was right, but not in the way he thought. I turned to Verity. Her voice dropped. "He built walls with pride. We used truth like water, slow, steady, unstoppable." For the rest of the afternoon, we sat together, reviewing operations, tracing every department he'd manipulated. In a buried folder, we found what we needed: email threads, detailing plans to liquidate family assets through shell companies, each alias tied directly back to him. Verity leaned back, eyes weary but bright. "We'll lock it down. We protect both the company and the family now." I nodded. "And the future." Later that night, I sat at my desk at home. I nodded. The glow of the screen lit my face as I began recording a message for my unborn child. My voice didn't shake. "One day, you'll read about all of this. The names, the betrayals, the noise. But remember, legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to protect." Outside, the world kept moving. The media headlines called it "A New Dawn at Holcomb Industries." I didn't smile. Dawn doesn't mean peace. It just means light. Hours later, I turned off the lamp and walked toward my bedroom. That's when I noticed the envelope on the floor, slid under the door. No postage, no handwriting, just my name. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken years ago. Me, at a park bench, reading. A private moment, never meant for anyone else to see. A note attached. The boardroom's just a stage. The real war begins at home. I looked up toward the window, scanning the streetlights beyond the glass. Nothing moved, but I felt it. The eyes, the threat. This wasn't a victory lap. It was just the sound of the gun going off. It's been a month. One long, quiet month. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but earned. I wake before sunrise, most days now. I like the stillness, before the world starts moving. I walk the same route through the neighborhood, hand on my belly, feeling her gentle kicks. She's steady, just like me. My life has fallen into a rhythm I never thought possible. Prenatal classes twice a week. Evening tea instead of whiskey. Journal entries that no longer bleed with anger, but with clarity. At the company, Verity and Griffin have done what I never could. Alone they've steadied the ship. The chaos has calmed, and for once, the building feels alive again. I don't hold a title anymore, but that doesn't bother me. I told someone the other day, it's not about titles, it's about influence. I meant it. I mentor now, interns, junior managers, the quiet ones too afraid to raise their hands. One morning, an intern spilled her coffee all over the meeting agenda. Her face turned pale, waiting for someone to humiliate her. I knelt beside her, helped gather the papers, and said softly, "Don't worry, it's just coffee. Happens to the best of us." She smiled, relief washing over her. No one had ever done that for me. It hit me then, maybe healing doesn't come from winning battles. Maybe it comes from breaking cycles. I've kept my therapy appointments every week. I don't go there to rehash pain. I go to learn how to live without letting it define me. The counselor told me last session, "You don't need to prove you're strong. You already are." I laughed, but it stayed with me. A few days later, I drove out to the memorial park. The sky was that soft, early grey that looks like forgiveness. Lorraine's name had been carved into the stone. Her birth and death years now, balanced in symmetry. I brought a candle, a small prayer stone, and silence. I sat there, talking to her, like she could hear me. "You were trying to protect me, weren't you?" I whispered. Inside the envelope her attorney sent me last month, there had been a small audio recorder. I pressed play. Her voice, older, softer than I remembered, came through with static. "If you're hearing this, Jen, it means you found your courage. Don't let him take it from you again. Earl never wanted money. He wanted control. Stay brave when your time comes." I sat there in my car, one hand over my stomach, tears sliding down my face. Not from sorrow, from recognition. She saw me, even when I thought she didn't. "You never really leave a place you love," she said toward the end of the tape. "Part of it you take with you, and part of you stays." I replayed that line 3 times before turning off the engine. A few evenings later, Griffin came by. He looked awkward, standing in the doorway, 2 coffees in hand. "Didn't know how you take it now," he said, setting one on the table. I smiled faintly. "Still black, still stubborn." He sat down, rubbing his hands together. "You were always stronger than I knew," he admitted quietly. "And I wasn't." "You learned," I said. "That's what matters." Verity joined us not long after, holding a small velvet pouch. "This was my grandmother's," she said, placing it in my hand, a delicate silver locket, aged but unbroken. "Legacy isn't about blood," she told me. "It's about character." We spoke of Earl's trial briefly, carefully. "It's not our burden anymore," I said. The real inheritance was surviving, and not becoming him. Griffin nodded. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't strained. It was peace. Weeks rolled by, and I started to smile, without thinking about it. Friends and neighbors gathered at the house for a baby shower. No grandeur, no photographers, just laughter, home-cooked food, and the kind of love that doesn't need proving. During the toast, I stood up and said, "Still, like dust, I'll rise." They all clapped not because of the quote, but because they knew the weight behind it. That night, I received an email from a women's business council, inviting me to join their advisory board. I accepted immediately. It wasn't ambition anymore, it was purpose. Later, I moved through the nursery, folding tiny clothes, arranging small shoes on a shelf. I'd painted the room soft sage, calm, balanced, forgiving. I set Verity's locket beside the crib and whispered, "You won't inherit my wounds. You'll inherit my wisdom." Just as I turned off the lights, I saw an envelope under the door. My name printed neatly across the front. I opened it. Legal stationery. Earl's name stamped in bold from his prison cell. He was suing for a stake in the company. Even behind bars, he couldn't let go. I stood there, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Not from fear, but from the weight of the cycle trying to pull me back in. Then I folded it neatly, placed it on the counter, and said aloud, calm and certain, "Let's dance one last time, old man. The past doesn't vanish. It lingers, waits, but so do I. Stronger, wiser, no longer alone."